Hi everyone, welcome to the Scottish Summit 2021. My name is Oliver Rodrigues and today I'm going to talk to you about Power Apps Portal's best practices. I hope everybody is keeping safe and if you're sharing this in social media, please don't forget to add the hashtag Scottish Summit 2021. Before we get started, I'd just like to say a big thanks to our sponsors, ScriptRunner, DQ Global, Proximal 3, Redspire, Agilysys, and Hitachi Solutions. Thank you guys, without you this event wouldn't be possible. Just a brief description about myself here. I am passionate about technology and the entire Power Platform. I've been working with Power Apps Portals for a bit over 3 years now, and I love to share my knowledge with the community. I am also a Microsoft certified trainer and I am a super user in the Power Users Forum. So if you've ever posted a question in the Power Users Forum, it's very likely that I've seen your question or even replied to your question. So I work in Codec, Ireland. I work as a Dynamics 365 team lead, and I'm leaving here a few contact details, so my Twitter handle, my blog, and my LinkedIn as well. Feel free to reach out to me. So in today's session, I want to go through a few different areas of the portals and show you guys a few tips that I've learned throughout my experience. Now, I'm not saying my ways here are the only correct ones or the most correct ones, but it's basically a few tips that I gathered throughout the years and I want to share with you. So I picked different topics around the portal. So these are portal provisioning, authentication, portal customization, portal content, security, performance, JavaScript, caching, application lifecycle management, and troubleshooting, and then we'll jump to a Q&A. So first tips around portal provisioning. First one would be to choose the correct portal template. So we have probably around 6 portal templates, I think, currently, and basically what the portal templates contains is a different subset of web templates and web pages predefined. So when you're installing a portal template, a specific template, those web pages and web templates will be installed in your environment. Now, Microsoft, in the official documentation of the portals, there is a table comparing all the portal types. So I would recommend you taking a look at that table and just to choose the correct portal template. Just one thing that is important to know here is that all of the templates, they are running under the same web application. So the same source code of the portals is running for all the templates. But the difference here would be some records predefined in your Dataverse environment. So just choose the correct one so you don't have extra records or extra web page that maybe you're not using in your portals. Another one would be to avoid provisioning multiple portals for just trial purposes. So I've actually seen a few clients doing this. Basically, they want to try the portals and they start provisioning different portal types just to keep having trials. This actually creates a mess in your environment if you think about. Let's say then you want to start your actual portal project. Once you go to your environment and start playing with the records, it's like you have hundreds, sometimes hundreds of web pages, lots of web templates. I've seen issues that because multiple portals were being provisioned, the portal records started to reference the wrong website record or the wrong language. It's just very frustrating once this happens. So and it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort to fix the records and the references. So if you're creating a portal just for trial purposes, try to create that in a complete isolated trial environment if you can. Even if you have to import your solutions or import your data, just avoid doing that in your actual sandbox or even production environment. Authentication. I think this is probably known to a lot of people. Local authentication, you should avoid. Microsoft is highly recommending people to go to Azure AD B2C, and they are improving the experience of you to create an Azure ADB2C environment. So avoid using local authentication. It's not 100% clear if that's going to be deprecated or not, but it's not ideal for you to have username and passwords stored in your Dataverse. So and there's a lot you can do with Azure ADB2C. So we highly recommend you to use ADB2C. Also, another thing is making sure you have unique email address on your contact records. Basically, there are a few known issues if you have same email address in your contacts when you're registering users to your portals. So if for some reason your environment will need to have duplicated email against the contact records. Few things here around portals customization. There are two main areas. There is a third one, but I'm gonna talk about these two main areas where you can customize your portal. So there is a Portal Studio and Portal Management app. The Portal Studio is a very user-friendly interface. We have the drag and drop functionality. You can easily make changes to content and or just create new pages and forms, these kind of things. The Portal Management app, it is basically a model-driven app, and you have access to all the portal entities. So let me just switch here to my environment, and I'm gonna show you guys very brief about these two interfaces. So this one that I have open here is my Portal Management app, and just something to clarify here for everyone. I am coming from a Dynamics CRM, Dynamics 365 background. So for me, looking at this interface is very clear to understand what I'm doing. Okay, this is something that I'm very familiar with. I appreciate that lots of people are just starting with Power Apps portals now, and they don't necessarily have this Dynamics 365 background. So one thing that I like about using the Portal Management app, perhaps is because I'm a bit old school, but I do like to understand the data model behind the portal. And this view here will help me understand how the entities are connected to one another. And basically it is easy for me to understand all the relationships between the portal records. So for this reason, I personally like to use the Portal Management app to do my portal customizations. Okay, another reason here that I like using this is because you have access to all portal functionality via Portal Management app. And if I jump here to my Portal Studio, so I'm going back here to make.powerapps.com, I have my apps open. If I select the Portal app and click on Edit, this will launch me to the Portal Studio. And you can see that the interface is completely different here, and I can very easily make changes to text, to the content of the portal, creating pages and a few other things. And I think it's very user-friendly. It's very good for if you're not experienced with Dynamics 365, but you are a bit limited. Now Microsoft is putting a lot of investment here, and they are constantly adding new features to the Portal Studio. So again, there's no right or wrong. I personally prefer the Portal Management app, but I understand that if you're new to Power Apps portals, Portal Studio is more user-friendly and might be easier to edit content. But I still like to understand the data model, so perhaps give it a chance to Portal Management app as well, just to see the difference and see which one of you it suits best for you. Avoid having same column multiple times in a form. So basically, if you have an entity form, let's say it's a create or an edit entity form, and you put the same field, same column multiple times, this might cause an issue in the portals, and it might not identify which field you're updating. So basically, just avoid that. I think if it's a read-only form, might not be an issue. But if it is an edit or an insert entity form, you might face an issue there. So just avoid that. There are few data types that are actually not supported by the portals. So custom controls like PCF that might be coming soon in preview, but there are a few others. There are image fields, there are multiple option sets, multiple choices, sorry. So a few data types are not supported by the portal, so just be careful there. Also, something important I think is rollup fields or rollup fields. By default, if you're using rollup fields in the model-driven app, they are normally read-only, and you can't make changes to that field. But in the portals, unless you make it read-only, it will be editable in the portal. So just be careful with that field as well. Naming conventions. So for both, I'll just show you guys here a tip that I use in every project. So I have a predefined naming convention for both portal components and my Dataverse components. So let me just jump back here to my environment. And I'm navigating here in my portal management app. So first, let me just quickly go to my entity lists. So I have a very simple entity list showing a list of accounts, and you can see here the name for my entity list is SS Accounts Entity List. So SS basically is for Scottish Summit. So I always add a prefix with can be the name of my project, the name of my company, my initials, whatever. It's basically to separate the out-of-the-box components, records from the portals, and the custom ones. So now for entity list, this wouldn't make a lot of difference because I only have one, which is my custom ones. But for example, if I jump to my web pages, I'm gonna see a list of web pages, and straight away I can see that the three last ones here are custom. Or also I can just search, just type SS and search, and I know I'll be jumping to my custom records here. And also, as you may have noticed, I not only add a prefix, but I also add a suffix. I normally like to put the record type in the end of the name of my record. So SS Accounts Entity List. This, to be honest, this doesn't make a lot of difference for me nowadays. But when I started working with portals, and then I had, for example, a web page with a custom page template, with a custom web template, and if I was just calling them, let's say, for example, SS Accounts, it would be a web page called SS Accounts, a page template called SS Accounts, and a web template called SS Accounts. So myself, I was getting mixed up between the records that I was. So I started adding in the end of the records web page, a page template, and web template, just as I have here, entity list. And this personally helped me to locate myself where I was. Again, that's optional, but it helped me in the past. It might help you as well. Also, what I also do is not only add this initials in my portal components, my portal records, but I do the same for my Dataverse components. So basically, this entity list is pointing to a view called SS All Accounts. And if I go here to my entity forms, it's going to be the same. So jumping here, so I have two entity forms, a create and insert entity form and an edit one, and both are pointing to the SS account form. So I always customize whenever I'm creating an entity form. I make sure I'm pointing to a specific form that is only relevant to the portal. So and then in case you're not very familiar with Dataverse customizations or Dynamics 365, I can restrict this form to only show for portal for assistant administrator. So this form wouldn't be shown for a user, a backend user, using operating the model-driven app. So that's something I like to do. And as well as tomorrow, if someone is making a change to your form, and let's say they only want to make the change against the form that is used in the model-driven app, it's very easy. They will straight away know that this form is not the one that is used in the model-driven app. They will know that this form is being used in the portals. Now, of course, that the naming convention you have to define within all your developers, and everybody has to be aware of what it means. But it's just a quick tip that it does help me in my projects, and I would recommend you guys following something similar. Just a final one, avoid overriding the out-of-the-box CSS files. I think there are 2 or 3 out of the box. There's the theme, the bootstrap, and maybe another one. Personally, I don't like making changes to those files. Always create a web file with a new CSS and make your changes there. Portal content. First one is use content snippets for any kind of label that you may have. Let's say you have a custom web page or a custom web template that you're rendering some content there. Let's say it's a custom list or a custom form. Avoid hard coding the labels in there. Put everything in the content snippets, and it's very easy to call content snippets via web template using Liquid. And I can quickly show here. Let me just jump back to my environment, and I'm going to navigate to my web templates, and let me just search for my custom one. I have a web template showing basically a custom, it's basically rendering a list of the accounts, and let me just show you guys as well the list here. Bear with me just 1 second. So this is basically the out-of-the-box entity list, but when I click on create, I'm injecting here via JavaScript a list with all the accounts. Okay, this was just for example, and you can see here I have the account name, main phone, city, and so on. So here in my custom web template, I'm fetching the accounts, and then I'm rendering a table with my records. So you can see here I'm looping through the results of my fetch. Now in here, you can see that I'm not hard coding the label, but instead I'm calling a content snippet, and these snippets are called SS account list, name label, phone label, address, city label. And then if I jump to my content snippets and again search by SS, and you see that I'm gonna have my labels here. Another good reason for you to do this is because let's say you want your users, your end users, to be responsible for defining the labels in a portal. You don't necessarily want to give them access to a web template or web pages. Those might be a bit sensitive records, as you have HTML code or even Liquid and JavaScript. So if you just give them access to the content snippets and say, listen, if you want to change label, just go here to the content snippets, and that's it. That's done. You won't be putting your portal there in danger by giving them access to that. So that's very recommended. Still similar here. Let's say you have a multi-language portal, and I've done a session on multi-language portal back in October, and I appreciate that I actually owe to the community. I have to publish it to an XRM Toolbox tool there, but I just haven't had the time lately, so I'm sorry about that, guys. But just what I wanted to mention here is that if you have multi-language portal, when you're using the content snippets have a reference to the language. Now in my scenario here, I don't have multi-language enabled, so it would only come as English. But if you have multi-language enabled and you select here your language, the portal would be taking care of rendering the correct label once you're using the content snippets. So in your web template, you wouldn't need to worry about, oh, is this language A, B, or C, and display a specific label. You don't have to worry about that. Just call the snippet and the portal would deal with that. Similar to that, use the site settings as a configuration entity. So let's say you want to enable or disable certain features, or I don't know, you have a specific GUID that might change between environments, and you don't want to hard code that. You can use that in the site settings. So if I just jump here quick to the site settings, so you see I don't have any custom ones here, but like if you're using the search feature or any other feature, you can just create your own here, and then you can just call that via liquid. Again, it's just a quick way to avoid hard coding anything in your portal. So just use the site settings whenever you can. And similar to that, site marker. So if you're not familiar to site marker, basically the site marker contains a reference to a web page, and this site marker, like if someone, let's say someone changes the partial URL from a web page, the site marker wouldn't be affected. So you can still reference in your code, in your liquid code, the site marker instead of referencing directly a web page URL. So just, I think the general message here that I want to give is, do not hard code anything that you can in your portals project. So if you have labels, try to use content snippets as much as you can. If you have any kind of configuration data, try to use site settings. If you have URLs that let's say you have a button, a custom button redirecting to somewhere in your portal, don't hard code the URL there, the partial URL. Use a site marker instead. Security tips. It's very common for us to restrict an entity list or an entity form to only allow authenticated users or even specific web role users to access those records. And that's what's the most important in regards to security, I would say. But something that I would highly recommend is to using the web page access control rules. So let me just jump back here to my list in my portals. So again, this is an accounts list, entity list out of the box, nothing special here. And I have enabled security role, the entity permissions for this entity list. Now, if I copy this and open an in private session where I'm not authenticated, I'm gonna be given the following error message: you don't have permissions to view these records. And this is fine. There's nothing wrong here, and this is making sure my records are secure. Now, if I jump back here to my portal management app, I can create a web page access control rule. And let me just call this account list web page access control rule. Select my website, my web page. I'm going to say restrict read, and then I'll select the authenticated web role. So basically what I'm saying here is only the authenticated users will have access to this page. So you just clear the cache. And here for my authenticated session, just refreshing the page, nothing should change here as I'm already authenticated. There we go, no changes here. But if I try again with my in private session where I'm not authenticated, once I refresh this page, you see that I've been redirected to my sign in, to my login page. So this might be a much better user experience. So basically you're forcing your user to go sign in before they even get to that page. And also, in case I had this page in my menu here on the top, this would hide that page if I'm not authenticated. So try to use the web page access control rules as much as you can. Also, just something that you should bear in mind is that field security profile are not relevant for portals. So if you're not familiar with field security profile, basically it's a way for you to secure your data at a field, a column level. So you can say that only a group of users or a specific user even have access to view or to change a certain column in your form. But that only works in a model-driven app. So in the portals that would be open and it would make no change. So just keep that in mind. A few tips around performance. There's a very old feature, web page tracking, web file tracking, and login tracking. There was this flag under the records that you could keep those enabled. Now that is known for causing performance issues, so avoid that at most, and also that is deprecated, so do not use those features. Also, another thing that might have a performance impact here is entity permissions hierarchy. So basically you can set up your entity permissions with a parental scope, and basically it will cascade the permissions in your portals. And that's actually super handy. Let's say you have a main entity, an application entity with a lookup to the contact record. And then you have an application item that may not necessarily have a lookup to the contact. So you would set up the entity permissions for the application, and then the entity permission for the application item you would set up as a child of the application entity permission. And that's how you would be able to restrict to only that contact to access the records. If you keep going cascading that, you might have a performance issues there. So just be mindful of that. Now, if you have just like 2-3 entities, parental entities, that there should be no problem. But it's just in case you have lots that might cause an issue. So just keep that in mind. Perhaps if you feel that you're going down on too large, let's say like that, too large hierarchy, consider denormalizing maybe your data model and adding a lookup to the contact record in one of those entities, just to help the portals there. There are other tips around performance here, but I just don't want to get into much details. Basically, those are quick ones that could have performance impact in your portals. A few tips here around JavaScript. First one is where to place your JavaScript code. You can place it in your web template, in your web page, but is that a right or wrong way? I don't like to think that way. I just like to think of what's the most logical way to put your JavaScript code. So if my JavaScript is making changes, is manipulating the web page, I would place it in the web page. If it's just controlling the entity list or the entity form, I would normally place my JavaScript in my entity form or in my entity list record. That's how I like to think, and I just think it makes your portal records, portal customizations a bit better organized. Another thing I like to do is creating common methods, creating your own library. So for example, developers don't like to having to recreate all over the same methods, same functions all the time. So what we normally do is we create a generic function, passing parameters, some information, and then we make a generic code manipulating that. So that's what I would highly recommend you guys doing. So for example, if I jump here to my web templates, I have a simple example here. I'm calling this, just for example, SS for Scottish Summit JS library web template. Just copy this, and in here I have just a set field read-only function, and depending on my field name and read-only and my data type, I'm gonna call a sub function, just because depending on my data type I might want to hide certain additional elements. For example, let's say you have a lookup, you also want to disable the lookup search button, this kind of things. So for this reason, I just created a generic function here. Let me just jump back. So okay, now that's just an isolated web template for the moment. So just for example here, how can I include that JS library in my portal? There are a few ways again. The way I like to do is using a content snippet called tracking code. This may not be in your portal by default, but you can just create, it's just a content snippet of type HTML called tracking code. So then in here, in my HTML, I'm just going to add a liquid tag called include, and I'm going to add my JS library web template here. Basically, the include will render whatever is in this web template to my current page, and the tracking code is a content snippet that is loaded in every page in my portal. I could also be using the header web template or the footer, but I remember having an issue in the past with the header web template where it wouldn't load specific jQuery elements. So for this reason, I like to use the tracking code whenever I want a code to run in every page. So for now, if I just go here to my portal and I just try to find that function, so set field read only, you see that the function is not defined, it doesn't exist. Let me just clear the cache now, and I'll just refresh the same page here, and you see that I'm in the account list web page. So this page is not necessarily calling my JavaScript library, but instead it is my tracking code snippet. So if I do the same here, you see that I have the definition now for my function. So that's just a very quick example. Another way you could do is, instead of creating a web template, you could just upload your JavaScript file, but you might face one initial issue. And let me just jump back here in my portal management app, and if I go to web files and I try to create a new web file, let me just select my website. I'll just go ss lib.js. Let me save this. Now, when I try here to add a note, and let me select my JS file, once I click add note, I'm gonna receive an error because the attachment is not a valid type, and the reason for that is because it's a JavaScript file. By default, you can't upload a note with a JavaScript in your Dataverse environment. You can make that change in the system settings of your Dataverse environment. I would not recommend doing that, just because other users would be able to upload JavaScript files, and that's really not ideal. So a quick tip that I would give here is renaming your JS file to something else. Or just for example, I'll add DSS here, so Scottish Summit JS. And you see that now I can upload my JS file, no issues, just by changing the extension. You can still reference your JavaScript library via the partial URL, so you can keep the JS here if you want. Again, it's optional, it's really depending on what you want. And then finally, in your content snippets, in your tracking code snippet, you could just reference the JavaScript web file here. Another thing that I'd like to mention is the XRM portals JS from AK. AK is an MVP, and he created a library that we all can use. So that's available on GitHub. You can download it and upload as a web file. You can just reference. So there are a bunch of common functions there, and you can just use in your Portal projects. I would highly recommend, because there's a bunch of pre-built functions there that are very handy. A few things around Portal caching. So if you look online, you might still see a few references about the change tracking flag. So basically that's a flag under the table, your entity metadata. And basically Microsoft was trying to use that flag to clear the cache for certain entities or tables in your environment. But that's no longer applicable. That's gone. So if you see a reference for that, you can just ignore. What really matters about the caching is that the cache is cleared every 15 minutes for your data. For the configuration entities, you will need to clear those manually, but for your data itself, it is cleared every 15 minutes. And that should be enough for most scenarios. Another thing here is if you perform a transaction that is synchronous via the portal. So let's say, for example, you create a record and then you have a plugin or a workflow that is synchronous real time, and that's triggered, let's say, straight after that record is created or updated via portals. That is automatically invalidated the cache for that. So you will see the changes straight after in the portals. If, let's say, you're calling a portal automate once a record is created or updated in your environment, that change, that whatever action the Power Automate is doing, that change won't reflect in the portals straight away. You will face the 15 minutes SLA for that. So in case you need to make any changes via background workflow or something, try to see if you can make those synchronous. And just a final one around caching, and I find this super useful, is having this JavaScript code in a favorite, in a bookmark in your browser. So you've probably noticed when I was here in my portal, I just clicked on this favorite here, clear cache, and I'm doing one click, single click with my left click mouse, and I'm getting redirected to this clear cache page. So, and this is, as you can see here, if I just right click on and go on edit, you see that this is not a hard coded my portal URL and then the slash services about. This is just a JavaScript code that is reading my root URL and adding this in the end. So just so you understand what I'm talking about. And if I click on clear cache while I'm in this page, which is a model-driven app, which there is no really clear cache here, and just click on it, I am redirected to my environment URL / services about. So basically it's a generic function that will always redirect me to the clear cache page. So I'd highly recommend this because it will work for literally any portals as long as you're logged in as admin. A few things around application lifecycle management. So now I'm not gonna dive into which tools to use here. There are a few tools that we can use to transfer portal data between environments, but a bit before that, I think this is more about your strategy. Okay? So define what is content and what isn't content. So for example, a content snippet or a web page, who make changes to that? So is it always your developer, or do you have an end user making changes to web pages or content snippets? If you have like this, and this is something that has happened in my projects. For example, we pushed content from dev to production, and this content is overwritten in production environment. But then we found out that production users were making changes to specific records that is related to content, like web pages and content snippets. So define this strategy in early stages of your project, so you will know what you can or what you should move across or not. Similar to site settings, so normally site settings would contain references to, let's say, it could be an application ID, it could be enable or disabling specific settings or configuration environment. It could contain a GUID that might be different across environments. So think of this as well when you're thinking about your ALM strategy. Just have a think about items that you shouldn't move across or you should move across. Be always careful when deleting certain objects. So for example, if you delete an entity form, let's say, sorry, if you delete a form from your Dataverse that is being used in the portals, this might cause an issue with the portals. And normally the tools that we have for ALM, so the tools in XRM Toolbox or even configuration migration, they would normally be adding, updating or creating the records in the target environment, but they would normally not be deleting the objects. So have a think about that. If you delete the let's say a web link or a content snippet from your development environment and you want it to be you want that to be deleted in your target environment, keep a note to that, because you might have to delete it manually. And just finally here, that's something that I do. I love to have a Visual Studio project with my code. And if I just jump here to my Visual Studio code, this is literally just a folder structure with content snippets, CSS, JavaScript, web pages, web templates. If I expand here in JavaScript, I split into entity forms, entity list, web forms, web pages. So basically, I like to have this all under source control. This is not a project that I'm building and pulling from CDS, from Dataverse to Visual Studio or vice versa. This is just something that I manually do, and I copy and paste over the source code. And this is just helpful for me to keep track of my source code. I'm not going to much details here on moving the files like I mentioned. There's also a great session from Eugene from Fall into Portals that you guys can look for it online, that he explores a lot more the ALM process. A few things around troubleshooting. So I think probably this is the first and very, very important one, which is the show plugin error message. So if I jump back here to my portal management app, there is a site settings that by default this is not included in the portals. Just plug in. I don't have it here, that's fine. So if I try to create an account, and so there's something here that I already did. I added a plugin on the create of the account, and if I try to create the account with the name Scottish Summit SS 2021, this should throw an exception. And if I click on submit, so by default, we get this message, an unknown failure has occurred, which is not very helpful at all for you to troubleshoot. So what I would highly recommend is that you create this site setting. It's called, let me just get the name here. I'm gonna create a new site setting. And it's called site / enable custom plugin error. So once I create this, I'll clear the configuration. Let me refresh. As soon as this clears configuration, okay, I'll refresh this page. Okay, Now if I try to create my account record, so now I get a better error message. This is basically what I'm throwing in my plugin. You cannot enter an account with the name SS2021. This is just a silly example, but the idea here is just make sure you create this site setting so you can give better error message to your users. Also in Power Apps portals, when we get an exception thrown by the web application itself, there is by default a custom page that is displayed with a famous red message that is not really useful for you. So let me just try to replicate here. So let me just close this for a second. And now where I'm going to here is I'm gonna make a change to my directly in my solution. So let me just jump here to make.powerapps.com. I'm going here to solutions, and I have created a custom solution here with just a few things. I'm going to navigate to my account table. Then I'm going to click on forms, and in my form, all I'm going to do here is rename it. So basically it's called SS account form. I'll just add a number 2 here. Let me save this. And I'm going to publish. So while this is getting published, I'll just refresh here quick the account list. And now I'm going to click on create to create a new account record. As you can see, I'm getting this red error message here with this GUID that is not helpful for anyone. So basically, how do we know what's the real issue behind this? So now let me jump back here to my make.powerapps.com. And now where I'm going to is I'm going to click again in apps. Just change the environment here, just 1 second. And now I'm jumping to the settings of my portal app, and I'm going to click on administration. In here, there are plenty of actions we can do in regards to our portals. So let me just click on portal actions, and I'm going to click disable custom errors. Okay, so custom errors have been disabled for this portal. So let me just jump here to the account list. I'm going to refresh the page, and I'll click on create again. So now you see that I'm getting a more indicative message of what the error might be. So a form named SS account form couldn't be found on the entity account. So for a developer, from a developer perspective, this is a much better message, and they would be able to better troubleshoot and identify what caused the issue. Now, I wouldn't normally leave this enabled, this option like this in a production environment. I would probably leave like that on a development environment, just because that is, although it's fine for a developer and they will understand what the issue might be, it is also not a very friendly page for an end user, let's say. So in production, what you can do is enable diagnostic login, and what this will do is you can point this to an Azure blob storage, and then you can log your any errors there. So that's what I would recommend for you to do in production. Just to finish here, what are the debugging options we have with Power Apps Portals? So there's something that we really want, the community, the developers really want, but it's not something very straightforward, which would be debugging your liquid code, and that's not an option. Okay, in case you were wondering, we can't really debug our liquid code. We can, however, debug JavaScript code. I have mixed experience with that. Okay, so basically, when I'm just debugging a code that is 100% JavaScript, I can debug it with no issues. But I have an experience of when I mix JavaScript with liquid, I've had some issues when debugging my JavaScript code. Now it could be something with my code or my environment, but I just don't find the best experience there. The way I normally debug my code is by just adding lots of console logs. Of course, remember to remove those when you're going to production, but I do try to add a few console logs via JavaScript, and when I'm using Liquid, developing in Liquid, and I need to troubleshoot, I just try to minimize my code as much as possible. So for example, let's say you're fetching records from a table, and then doing a custom rendering of a table or of that record. Try to minimize as much as you can. So put just the fetch there, show the results in a very simple way, and then start adding your code little by little. I think there's no way to debug and knowing where the issue might be. So just try to minimize the code, make sure some part of it works, and then start adding it little by little. There's no really key here. There's no really magic. It's literally just the only way we can do it for debugging here. Unfortunately, we can't really debug code. Microsoft is improving the portal checker. So basically, every so often, Microsoft adds more things there in the portal checker that will help us. But right now, there's not a lot they can do to add a debug feature. That was it for my session, guys. I know I spoke a lot here. There was a lot to cover, and I'm pretty sure I haven't covered everything I wanted. All the sessions will be available on YouTube in 14 days. I'd like to thank everyone for joining the session and to join the event itself. I'd like to thank all the sponsors as well as and of course everybody that helped organizing this event. Thank you, everyone, and I'm available now for any questions.